Now we have a panel called Making the Team. On your programs, it said that Jayde was going to be joining us, but unfortunately he's unwell. So instead, we have the wonderful Joanna Fang joining us for this panel, along with Chris O'Neill and Fernando Pepe. So would you like to come up on stage? So this panel is going to be all about the process of building out a team, leading it, and how to make a good first impression when applying to join one. So this is basically how to get people to like you panel. You're going to give us your best tips on being charming, but also employable. Am I right?
No pressure.
No pressure whatsoever. So would you each like to introduce yourselves? Fernando, we'll start with you.
Yeah. My name is Fernando. I am from Brazil. I work at Wildlife Studio. It's a mobile company there. And externally, I work at Moon Sailor as well. And there we work on everything but not mobile, because I can. So, but yeah.
I'm Chris O'Neill. I work at Playside. I'm a senior audio designer there. We do lots of platforms at this point in time. We're doing we started with a lot of mobile content as well, the better part of 5 to 8 years worth of mobile dev, and then pushing further into PC, VR, multi-console stuff. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Joanna Fang. I am the senior Foley artist at Sony PlayStation Studios Creative Arts Sound. We're a really cool team made up of myself, Blake Collins, and a few of our vendor partners and contractors. We basically supply Foley to a global sound team made up of roughly anywhere from around 72 individual sound designers all around the world. So trying to understand how to fit into a team while also leading a team is a very large part of what I do besides goofy sounds.
But goofy sounds being the most important.
Farts, yes.
That's what I was looking for, thank you. So remember, we do have Slido running for this one, so if you have any questions that you would like to ask our panel, just chuck them on in there. But we'll start off, what defines a great team? We're talking about making a great team, but what is a great team?
I think it's to do with what you're able to... There's a few aspects that kind of come to mind for this, right? One is going to be, you've got to have a shared vision about what you're hoping to achieve and how you're going to do so as well. There's also, you've got to be really strong in how you're able to communicate what each individual's take is on that thing as well, because if you're looking at something as this is the goal, everyone's going to have a slightly different angle as to what they expect and what they want to achieve with this, and then how you're going to do it. And there's a lot of trust, I think, is probably the big parts. There's plenty of technical requirements to be able to do things, but beyond that, you've also got to be able to trust that other people are going to be able to support you to achieve these goals. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a team with the same culture, and when you are comfortable to work with and ask feedbacks, ask support, make questions, I think that is they start to create a good team. And then I think the rest is part of the process, like deliver a good job and have results. But I think start with creating a good relationship with the team, yeah, and trust is something related to that, yeah.
I also think a really great team is greater than the sum of its parts. That, admittingly, as a Foley artist, I have my weaknesses and my deficiencies, but combined with the right people, we're able to kind of bring out the best in one another while minimizing the liabilities that we create for one another. So I've always found that, if I can acknowledge that I have things I need to work on, that means I can always improve, and therefore, every time I interact with my team, I can bring more and more of myself to it.
Would you say that trust is the cornerstone of a good team? Or is there something else that you think is more important?
I think trust is the most important, I guess, because I think if you can rely on that, if everyone in your team and they can trust on you as well, if you make decisions and I don't know, create the goals and the pillars of the team, I think you are good to go.
Agreed. I think trust allows people to be a bit more human as well. I think that ultimately you're exploring the ability to generate something to also ultimately evoke a human reaction to something, right? That's part of the joy of the craft. And so if you're able to be able to trust that while you are working towards a shared creative process, that like, oh, if somebody is sick, then you're going to be able to trust that someone else is going to be able to fill in this gap that you were required to do. You know, you're trusting other people with your babies in these processes, and that they're going to treat you with the same sort of respect that you would give them.
Especially true in audio and music, where, you know, we trust our immediate work partners and our audiences to kind of provide feedback and also just hear the things that you can't hear, right? I think when we're deep in the mix or we're deep on a song, we become biased towards perceived flaws. So if you don't have a trust relationship with your immediate collaborators, you won't truly understand this thing you've made, right? Because I think we are all our own worst critic, but we just all have substantial subjectivity bias about the things we're working on. So having the trust to hear somebody tell you, like especially on a Foley stage, where it's like, I might do a sound that I thought was freaking awesome, and then to hear Blake go, hey, you could do better than that. Like, I have to trust him on that note and then try again. And so if you don't have that trust, you'll never grow. Like, you need to trust other people so that you can grow. And that's how we get past that.
Yeah, and I think depends on the project that we are working or the clients. Sometimes it's a little difficult to work with audio in games because maybe it's not a priority of the game, maybe a lot of things can happen. And I think if you have a team that you can support you in these difficult moments of the process of creating the sound for the game, I think it's better because we feel more comfortable to not just to improve, but to be more, I don't know, human, I guess, and feel like you are in a safe place, I guess. Yeah.
One more thing that comes to mind off this, like, I remember when first starting with Playside and then being able to grow out a team, you know, everyone kind of comes from a freelance perspective in some point, for the most part, really. And you're in audio, you tend to spend a lot of time by yourself. And suddenly it felt like, oh my God, I can talk to somebody else at any time about all the projects I'm working on in great detail. Like, they've got all the same NDAs, the same everything. And then the ability to actually get feedback where you otherwise might not be able to do that is invaluable. So you're trusting that the perspective you're taking for your own creative compass is as correct as possible. But then you're also trusting that someone else's feedback, like you just said, is like, oh, it's close, but it's not quite what you could achieve with that. Right. And it's something that I think really makes the team really strong, is the ability to trust that if everyone goes, yep, tick, you've got 5, 6, 70 different people's perspective saying, yeah, this is fantastic.
Culture fit is something that's often discussed when talking about hiring people, when talking about building out a successful studio. How do you balance achieving a good culture fit and building a good culture for your studio with bringing in people from different cultural backgrounds who might have different approaches to things? Ooh, tricky question. That one was a Radley special. You're welcome.
I think there's something to be said that feeds into the fact that, like, the difference in cultural background is going to be innate regardless, because, again, if we go back to the idea that most people are coming from a freelance perspective, you are creating a team of people who have worked out how to professionally become entirely self-reliant, right? So how you're approaching stuff, how you are putting your best foot forward, how you would communicate, which program you're going to run, like every facet of that becomes something that you have to work out how to engage with when you're inviting somebody to come and be part of that. And it has to be a reciprocal thing as well, of being able to say, great, so when Playside we use Reaper, we definitely did not all use Reaper at the starting point. And that can be a thing that becomes a little bit of a scary thing the minute you put your foot through the door and go, great, I'm here, I've done it, I'm going to prove myself. Oh shit, I'm doing an entirely different workflow that I've never done before because here's the tools I now have to use. So, like, whatever you're looking at from that starting point of any sort of different background, whether it's at a personality level or a culture fit level, I think there is something that is to be said for, you have to find a way to be able to find common ground on whatever that thing is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's good when we have diversity as well, because that changes the perspective of what you are doing. So I think trying to create a team that has different people, different culture, different genre, I think that can create a more, I don't know, you can focus on different things and different process. You can understand different ways of creating sound, different ways to, I don't know, creating the texture, the color of what we are doing. But if the culture behind the people that are working on it is the same, it's probably going to be like they will go into the same direction. So I think having a diverse team, it help to, I don't know, seeing a different perspective what we are doing, and I think that's a good thing. At least I believe that it's something that it's important to creating a team.
Yeah, I mean, that on that point, we, you know, nowadays with the independent game market the way it is, we're creating global products, right? And so we have to be able to relate with a very large audience. And if you don't have that diversity, like you mentioned, within your team, you're not going to benefit from having a wider worldview about all the possibilities that you can bring to the table. So when it comes to culture fit, I always find it's a really interesting question because I know in the past a lot of companies have kind of used that excuse to exclude people, especially type B personalities. And you know, a lot of us nerds are a little bit more introverted. You know what I mean? So there are biases out there that definitely get in the way of gainful employment for a lot of people. But I think what matters as team leaders, as folks who get to have a say in the interview process, that like we're able to put aside those biases and try to find that true cultural fit, right? And then, like you had mentioned, it's about the project. It's about your passion and your ability to interact with a very wide, diverse set of people. So for me, culture fit is like, if I meet somebody who's not quite up to speed on the tools, but they clearly are able to communicate and work with us on really difficult, challenging things, then we can always level up their tool set. But if they're unwilling to sit down at the table and show a little bit of humility, and also have confidence in the right times, then we won't be able to bring that out in them.
I think that sounds like a really great point, and it also comes back to the cornerstone of trust, of being able to show confidence and humility kind of in equal parts. Probably is one of those key elements that's gonna make culture fit work, because it means that you're gonna be interacting with the team in a way that you're bringing your own kind of strengths to the table, but also understanding when you need to kind of give way to someone else. Yeah. Do you ever find challenges in language within or between teams? For example, music jargon, DAW jargon, dev jargon, engine terminology, etc.
Yes.
Vigorous nodding.
Yes. I think it depends. For Playside, it's an interesting one because like we have a lot of projects at any given time. We're on a lot of different platforms, different engines, different tech stacks, different stuff. And so trying to find and just be really, really clear about what each party is talking about is a really important thing. But like a great example that comes to mind off the side from that is that if you talk about a producer within games, in a game studio, a producer is a very different role to anything that we would expect that is here in this room. That's an entirely different skill set. An audio engineer in a game studio is an entirely different role. It's an audio programmer, basically. So like when it comes to people trying to have two-way conversations about these sort of things, it's great when people are also trying to really meet on terminology that we might be across, but it could be very confusing because there's just some fundamental differences within that as well.
So how do you overcome that?
Practice.
Oh.
Just like, hey, just so you know, a great example, for instance, when it came to any hiring call-outs a little while ago, and we were putting out a role for an audio producer and an audio programmer, and we were finding we had lots of conversations with HR at that point in time where they were saying, yeah, but LinkedIn and all our services love audio engineer. And I was like, you are going to be swamped by all the people who do not qualify for this job straight away. There's a lot of just conversation and working out how to meet in the middle with these sort of things.
There is quite a large difference in how indie studios operate to mid-sized studios to major studios. And what we generally see is that, you know, indie studios, you have to wear many hats. You have to learn how to do lots of different roles. And that also is the space in which a lot of people kind of get their start. How do you then learn what the differentiation is between what becomes very specialized roles if you're looking to move into a more major studio?
Yeah, I used to use this analogy between the independent film market and the like Hollywood mainstream film market, especially for people who are in crafts, right? People who are like sound designers, Foley artists, what have you. For me, it's like basketball, right?
Ooh, okay.
Or it's like football, right? There's any
we know sports.
Any sport ball.
Which football?
Yeah.
Because for me, it's a
Football.
different sport, I guess.
Yeah, because at its most fundamental level, right, we understand what that game is, right? You can play. Okay, let's stick to basketball, or else I'm going to be flipping the cultural metaphor. But basketball, yeah, you have a hoop, you have a ball, and you have you and your friend, right? Or even solo play, just trying to shoot some hoops. There is these inherent essential things that come from the concept of basketball, right? And so when you're in an indie studio, you are, you have to wear a lot of hats, and if you're in a small team, that is true as well. But as long as you're still working together to try to get the ball into the hoop, then that's your objective. Versus if you are playing for like the NBA, where you have entire personnel dedicated to one or two very specific roles, you're still just trying to get the ball through the hoop at the end of the day, right? Like, so anytime back in my past in the film industry, anytime I heard somebody complain like, I was on this film, so it was so unprofessional. They had the sound person booming and mixing at the same time. I'm like, that's a very privileged position to take, because most independent films, you're doing both. But I have to keep reminding people it's basketball. So by that, what I mean really is that there are similarities, and those similarities should be the touchstones that you carry with you. Even though I work for a fairly large company and do something extremely niche, I'm still wearing many hats. I'm taking everything I learned about production management and internship coordination and mentorship back when I worked for a much smaller studio and reapplying it into a larger pool. You will never be punished for knowing more than you should. In most things in life, actually, come to think of it. But every skill you gain when you work indie and you've done a million things, it's going to if you do end up working extremely niche, it's gonna completely inform how you do what you do, and it's going to make you a much better hire as a result.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's not bad to know more stuff, but I think everything is related to researchers that we had, researchers on the studio. Like, for example, working with small studios, you need to do everything. It's normal. Depends on if you are just a freelancer or working a game studio that has clients. We need to do more like the sound designer is the composer as well. But even on bigger companies, for example, in wildlife, we have the sound designers, 2 sound designers, and they need to do music as well. Because we are a small team there, it's a lot of games, so we need to put more hats. So part of this indie process that they work, we continue to do even in a larger company. So I think it's good to try to focus. If you have opportunity to work on more than one thing, I think it's try to understand everything, because you use that in other companies as well. And I think it's part of the game. If we start to get bigger, we start to be more specified in the work. But yeah, I think at the end of the game, it's how much money they want to spend on audio, I guess. And it's not our control, I guess.
I love that basketball analogy, but what does one do when the rest of the team goes, oh, they're really good at getting that ball into that hoop, I'll let them, and I'll just be on the side supporting should they need me, but not necessarily participating or putting in quite as much effort?
That kind of feeds into what I was going to say before, is that like, in theory, where that comes into play is if somebody is like, this person has a 90% strike rate for any shot they're taking, they'll get that. Great, okay, what else needs to be done on this project? And I think that's kind of when you end up wearing a lot of hats for a lot of early stages, a lot of indie dev, a lot of small team things, and you'll still likely do that as it progresses as well. But part of what becomes a really important aspect of the team and the structure is to do with, all right, well, if this is what is required and this is the most efficient and best way to get this particular task done, okay, how are we delegating everything else? What are the responsibilities that we're expecting for the rest of this task list, and how are we going to be handling that across other people? Is there anyone else who is a fantastic, I don't know, just they lob the ball from the other end, like that's their thing. So we got 2 people making that process really easy, right? If that's the sort of vibe that you can have a really good strike rate, then you're also freeing up resources for other people to do other things too. And so I think it's really about, if it's not so much about one person carrying the team all the way through, which it shouldn't be, really, there's other problems at that point, but if there's one person who's exceptionally good, then what can you do to support, and where else can you slot in along that way to make sure that you are also part of the process to get the ball to them in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we try to avoid the hypothetical, right? Like, we like to hope that every person we bring on a team knows that if they're completing their tasks, to know when to ask for more or when to like relax a little bit. You know, I say that very much with empathy, because I understand that everyone works really hard in this industry, and frankly, everyone crunches. You know, even when you're at like a no crunch studio or no crunch position, something about being an artist makes you want to put in that little extra hour here or there to make it great. I think it's like an inherent thing, right? Especially if you love what you do. So I don't see that happen that often, even in large teams where it's easy to kind of be like disappear into the bushes, you know? But I completely agree. It's like, if you know somebody's super good at this one thing and you know they're taking on more than they can handle, then being able to be a good team player, step in and be like, what can I do to help you, is definitely part of great teamwork, right? Acknowledging, okay, I'm not good at everything, but they're great at that one thing, and they could definitely use help on the sides, and just being kind enough just to ask.
How do you consolidate the overall vision for a team with differing views on the same game? How do you determine the one ideal from different minds?
I mean, look, thankfully, by the time it gets to you, by the time the process has been set in motion to be able to start making a game, someone else has already basically established something. There is a vision holder elsewhere down the line that has been approved to be able to get the funding, to be able to make this an opportunity that you're going to pursue in the first place. So you're already going to be beholden in some form to what that person or that team or that vision is. So that's the kind of the first step, right? It's always going to be about how does the audio team complement whatever this vision is that is the approved version? Because if we don't work with that, we're going to get a lot of pushback. It's going to be a bad time. So you're already going to be working to this particular idea. And then that kind of filters through a couple of different departments, a couple of other stakeholders, and it's kind of started to shape itself out a little bit further anyway by that point. So again, by the time it gets to you, it's a slightly smaller thing to go, all right, well, these are actually some of the constraints we're going to be working within to make this a viable thing. So you are collectively already working to a smaller vision anyway. Beyond that, you're then going to be limited by like whoever is going to be your vision holder in the team is going to have a pretty big say in how this needs to work in accordance with whatever that other stuff is way at the top. And then beyond that, it's also, I think, a bit of give and take, to be honest, because like if you're working in a team, or you're working with other people, if you're subcontracting out to other people, you want to get buy-in from the people you're working with. Like, you want to make sure that whatever this thing is, if you're really excited about it, get them excited. Give people an opportunity to kind of come up with something that is like, great, now in accordance with this thing that we've already worked out what the overall general shape is, here's your little corner, here's a thing that you can colour whatever you think is going to be suitable, and then we can go from there. And I think that's part of the process, right, is you're still adhering to a vision. You still have people kind of checking in along the way to make sure it's working to the overall picture that the whole damn thing is looking for, but then you're also allowing people a bit of freedom and fun to play with it too.
Yeah, I think depends on the project. We receive like an idea from the game director, or depends on the project, the art director, and I think you need to try to understand their vision for the game and create a guide style, like an audio style for the project, and then create a few, at least for us that we work on 10, 12 games at the same time, we need to create some guides for each project, because it's easy to create like a generic thing, and we try to avoid creating the generic sounds. So we try to create some guidelines for creating the sound for that game, the aesthetics, the pillars, the goals. And if someone on the team is very excited to work on that, we push them to try to create a few ways to help the other people that will work on the project to understand how they can start, because sometimes one person is working on a project, two persons working on that project, and sometimes we need to push everyone to that project because the timeline is more tight. So if the person that is responsible for creating, or at least creating the guide for everyone, I think we try to create some guides, and like, we are using that and that and that. We are trying to avoid this frequency. We are trying to avoid this and that. We are trying to be more, I don't know, squishy and less. The game is not mature. Depends on the game, but creating some guides and some ideas, and if we have time, try to create some process, and not that everyone needs to follow, because we try to give freedom for the designers to create new ideas, but at least to be more focused on one goal, because we are like, at least on Wildlife, we are a central audio team that covers different studios. So some studios we have more ability to create the audio direction for the game. Other studios, the studio directors want something, like we want the game sounds like this. So we need to to help them to create their games. So I think Creative's Guide help us, at least.
And on that note, when it comes to creating those creative guides that we then can distribute to the rest of the team, I like to hope that in the most ideal environment, every leader above you is supposed to absorb liability and risk. And I mean that creatively too. We've definitely, in my career, I've definitely dealt with, this is true for everybody here. We have a lot of folks who want to kind of bring the best out of us, and sometimes their notes are a little bit paradoxical. I mean, how many of y'all have received the note of like, it needs to sound bright but also warm? It needs to sound cold but also hot. Like, what are you talking? You know what I mean? We get these paradoxical requests from folks who maybe aren't sound oriented. And so your leaders and the folks who are directly communicating to those producers, they have to be able to work those things out to minimize everyone else's risk as a team. Right? And so I'm always of the belief that if I'm the one who has to present options, that if somebody tells me, hey, it needs to sound high tech, but also still has to make sound, like that's hard, right? Because if an object is rattly, that helps convey its sound, but if it's high tech, it shouldn't make rattle sounds, right? So I'm often dealt with these sound paradoxes, these riddles that are given to me from people who aren't sound people, but are trying to achieve something. And so my solution has always been, it's faster to create options for people and let them choose. Like you're an eye doctor, do you like A or do you like B? Because more times than not, people will say they want one thing, but they actually want something else. And it's up to your leaders to negotiate and navigate that risk, right? And so when it comes to those disagreements, I always find that like having a good team means that whoever's leading you will take a bold risk at one point or another, and they should own that decision. And so folks who are underneath those people, they should feel the freedom to work within the outline, the style guide that's stipulated.
One of the, I'm going to say, consequences of working in a field for a long time and being good at your job can often mean that your career progression leads to needing to be a leader of some sort. And I think people can often step into jobs not looking to be a leader, just looking to be damn good at what they do, and all of a sudden you've got people underneath you. So what are some very practical steps that you can take to figure out how to lead a team well, to be a good leader? What qualities do you need to be focusing on? Especially if you're not necessarily a natural born leader, you're just a little guy good at your job.
I mean, look, it's a hard one, because I'm going to guess that probably most of the people in this room, again, coming back to the freelancer thing, if you're sitting in a room by yourself, it's very hard to, by virtue of spending all this time leveling up your ability to get in the door, also then be working with teams and being taught how to do these things. I definitely did not have that when I walked in the door to build out a team. And you learn a lot of these things the hard way. And I think, probably for me personally, interpersonal skills was probably the thing that helped carry me through when there wasn't clarity, when there wasn't a past experience to be able to say, all right, well, my previous lead would have shown me how to do blah, blah, blah. Being able to say, great, let's try and work this out together, I think is the next best thing you can start to do.
I'm very lucky. I have quite a decent amount of soft skills in my tool set, and that comes from being a Foley artist. That comes from literally holding dirt in my hands and being told, that's not good enough, right? Like, I have to be able to handle feedback. But frankly, what I've come to notice is, sorry, I need a second because it was like a brainwave. You can always lead by example. You know, that's the one thing. I will always respect somebody who cares about what they do, has passion for it, and can turn around great sounds. And so in my career, I've definitely met many people who don't want the promotion. They don't want the liability and risk of leading a team. But that doesn't stop them from being awesome. That doesn't stop them from being a great example and showing the rest of the team the type of work ethic or creativity that needs to go into the game. So I always tell folks that if management and leadership isn't necessarily where you want to go in your career, that's fine. Being a great craftsperson and being able to bring folks into your room and just through the nature of showing them some stuff is often a massive improvement towards those qualities. And so a lot of the people I respect at work very much don't want to lead teams, but they're always very open to having you come in and sit down and listen to stuff with them.
Yeah, I guess that I think that is a lot of things related to soft skills. That is something that it's hard to learn and hard to teach. I think empathy is something that I think it's the most important thing that you need to try to learn, and because when you start to lead a team, we need to understand what it's the struggle of your team, the people that we are working on. You need to care with them because sometimes it's difficult job. Sometimes they have difficulty. We are talking about that upstairs. Like sometimes someone in the team has a problem with a tool, with a plugin, and you need to understand what they are struggle. Maybe something in their life that is not related to the work, and we need to understand that. We need to try to create a comfort place for them. So I think empathy is something that I think helps to be a good leader. But I totally agree. I think the people that I like. I have a friend that Mateus that we discussed a few days ago. Like, I love his work, and he says a lot of time, I don't want to be a lead, and I was like, you are very good. You will be a very good lead. But I guess that if you don't want to be a lead, I think has room to not be. It depends on the company. You have a principal ladder that you can go that it's more focused on be a very good on craft and create stuff. And that not necessarily means that you don't mentor someone or explain how to do or explain, I don't know, how awesome is creating sounds and music. But I think being a leader, it's more related to soft skill, I guess, because in the end game, everyone is trying to create good sounds, create good soundscapes, and I think anyone, freelancer or leader or sound designer, music composer, are trying to achieve that. But having people that you need to care, I think it's more, I don't know, based on relationship, I guess.
And I love the example of leading by example, because I think that helps you build those soft skills, because instead of focusing too much on like, oh, how do I, talk to people, you more so focus on, well, how would I want to be talked to? And that can kind of be a good guiding light. Pay in general can be a sensitive issue, but especially in the arts. How do you navigate those conversations and maintain healthy relationships when you disagree?
What was the first word you said?
Pay in general can be a sensitive issue.
Yeah, this is hard. So I think one of the interesting things that we found towards the end of last year and start of this year was PlaySide was putting together a JFM. It's a job family matrix, and the idea of that was a really clear ability to say, great, well, here's the sort of skills that are required for all the roles, and then at a particular area, when you first walk in the door through to being a lead and then everything in between, these are kind of what somebody should be able to tick the boxes are. And no one's ever going to get 100% of every little thing. You're going to have, weird little lines everywhere. But that was our first step into trying to establish, like, how do you kind of get a really meaningful metric, because there's not a lot of conversations or not really an easy way to approach it. Sounds like a massive cop-out, I'm sorry. But there's not an easy way to approach it, because we really dug deep to try and find what are functional industry standards for these sort of things, but there's not a lot of roles that exist like that in this country. So there's not a lot of data, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it. So it's a conversation that realistically, like, is very much still ongoing at this point in time. Pay is never going to be an easy topic in any form, especially living in this country.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing in Brazil.
It's just not an easy thing. And also there are some places that limit your ability to actually do that. I believe in the last little while, I think there's actually something that changed within the last, might be 12 months, where I don't think you can legally not be allowed to disclose your salary if you've signed on a contract at that point, which is a great step. Like, that means we're able to actually work out, all right, how's this all working? But it's the sort of thing where I think that how we've found being able to negotiate those sort of scenarios is by at least having a framework to say, well, this is the sort of building blocks that we would expect to be able to get into the next band. You know, this is a rough sort of ballpark timeline as to what that looks like as well. Starts building repeatable metrics to then be able to have these conversations again in 5 years and then go, great, well, here's a lot of people who are able to actually legally disclose their salary. Here's roughly where they're sitting. And then there's a bit more visibility in what that looks like. But it's very much an ongoing problem. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah, transparency is super key, right? Especially because, let's be real, the economics have changed from 2020 to 2023. And a lot of video games and tech companies had these really massive booms, and so they became extremely competitive trying to get the best people. That's global, that's worldwide. But as a result, we see a lot of folks who were brought on or loyal to their teams pre-pandemic basically not have equivalent pay compared to some of the pandemic hires that were made during these big boom and bust moments in tech and in games. So it's really important to have the transparency, especially now that we're kind of in this simmering moment as the pandemic has been kind of lessened out. Like, we're clearly all here in this room today. Those are painful conversations, but like surgery or many other things, there needs to be pain before the healing can begin, so to speak. Luckily in California, all of our job listings have pay bands listed. So that's been one way that legislation has been able to head that off. And like you had mentioned, having these job roles sketched out clearly. The game industry has changed a lot in that way too, in the sense that, like, in the past you would meet someone who's a supervising sound editor and you're like, what does that even entail? Compared to a senior sound designer or an associate level. And getting that on the record and seeing what each of those job entails, like a roadmap or a career compass, will help create that transparency and trust.
Do you have any methods or advice for setting up a good screening process when hiring? Anything you might do to ensure a good match/fit of applicants when growing?
Okay, so one of my favorite, we changed our casting process. I'm sorry, I've been talking about VO stuff for the last few days, and like, that's what my brain is. So our hiring process, we changed and did quite a long form version as an experiment a little while ago, and it worked a treat. We basically changed it where we realized that the hardest part of getting your foot in the door as an audio designer is that, like, there's a whole lot of boxes you've got to try and tick straight away. You're like, well, I've got to be good at my craft, I've got to be able to deal with people, I've got to be able to turn stuff around, I've got to have fantastic engine knowledge across every possible tech stack, I've got to blah, 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 and then I've got to prove all these things really bloody quickly. And beyond that, it's also the whole thing of, like, well, if I put forward a show reel, how much do I put in my show reel? What's the content? What's the bet? Is this the sort of content they want? Am I making a new show reel? Like, there's a whole sequence of different things, because ideally, you should be putting forward the best version of yourself as the targeted version for this very targeted role. But if we're all freelancing, there's no bloody time to do that a lot of the time as well, right? But what we realised was that we needed to give an opportunity for people to be able to put their best foot forward and then demonstrate their ability to work with feedback. And then from there, also then interviews you normally would. And then beyond that, actually see as a very, like, gentle, like, small contained version what it feels like to work with this person, because otherwise you have no idea about all their sort of skill sets, and then if you actually get along with this person throughout that process. So what we did was we did a submit your show reel, we did a screening process, and it was like, submit your show reel as a pre-submission, send that one through, We spent some time reviewing all the submissions, gave some feedback, and then said, great, this is a requirement for you to do before you actually submit for the job. You've ticked that box, thank you very much, now you can actually do the submission. And the important part from that was the show reels that made it through from pre-submission to the next ones were the ones who actually listened to the feedback and updated. Some show reels were like stupidly long. We just said, cut it down. This is not relevant to the thing you're applying for, boom, 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 boom. And there was at least one person who, when they submitted that, they made it all the way through the process. The first show reel wasn't the one that was selling it to us. Second show reel nailed it, got them in the door, got them into the rest of the processes. So we did a screening process from that, checked how they went for feedback, and then interviews, sussed how it felt, and then we did an over-the-shoulder test as well. So we gave them a little bit of footage the day before, and then basically said, right, so you're going to be designing to match this sequence, this little thing from Age of Darkness, and said, here you go, get used to it, collate your stuff, and then tomorrow at this time, I'm going to dial in and watch you piece together some content for this. So it's the best version of being able to be prepared and not just be like put on the spot. That is by far my favourite process we've ever done. It's really, really, really strong. And I think that's the sort of stuff that it ticked the boxes because it identifies how bloody hard it is to be able to demonstrate all those facets of yourself. But I think that if you're able to rise to those sort of things, have conversations, ask people about what sort of feedback can I get to make my submission process easier and better with this. If you understand what that looks like from the other end of it, it's a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, I think the interviews section of that, the interviews, it's very important because there we try to find some clues about how they will work with a team, how they, like in person, like try to understand how they, like not just because we have a lot of good sound designers, we have a lot of people that can create a good sound and can create good music, but I think in the end of the game, we need to understand if they will be good with the team, if they will be part of the team, if we can rely on him. And I think in the interview process, we do some culture questions to try to find if that person is part of our culture that we are trying to create on the team. And I think that it's aside the being a good professional, like create a good sound, I think that's the most important for me, because if he's incredible person, he or she is an incredible person, but when we chat with the person and we saw a few things that clues that it's not good to work with, I prefer a person that is not that good, but we can train him inside because he's a person that we can, I don't know, has better relationship.
What are maybe some of those red flags?
I think the way that the person responds on feedback, I think it's more important one. And I think depends on, we do a few questions about other jobs that the person did and how they create the sounds, how was the interaction, and we have a few, it's like, it's not a template, but we have a few questions that we did. I learned that with Vincent when I was interviewed to Enjoy Wildlife, and was like, how is your favorite game? Like, it's totally normal question, and then that question opens a lot of things that you can go and dive in, and you can understand more about that person with just simple questions. And I think that is something that helps to understand the person, understand if they are passionate about creating sound, creating games. And then we start to try to find some clues, because sometimes it's difficult to understand if that person is good fit or not in culture. But I think that is a few ways to find that.
In terms of red flags, just speaking from my experience, our interview process is multi-tiered. There's a lot of stages to clear. You're working with a lot of different groups. But if someone's combative when they've received notes, that's like the most clear red flag ever. And I'll got a confession to this room and to those in the live stream. PlayStation hated my first test that I submitted. It was very firmly put down, and they had like a lot of issues with the overall mix. And look, I'm a Foley artist. You know what I mean? I'm not the best re-recording mixer. I'm not the best I'm not even the best editor, but I had to take that.
Damn, can you stomp a boot?
But then boots. No, but I had to take that feedback, and it really was kind of soul crushing, But I had to learn to sit with it, with my ego, and then have the professionalism to say, "Thank you. Can I try again?" Right? Can I take these notes and give it another shot? And on top of that, after all that, one of the big things that happened was, I'm very lucky. I get to work one-on-one with Blake. And so one of the big things I asked is like, okay, in terms of culture fit, I do need to talk to the person who I'm going to be working with 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And so one of the big things I was very lucky I got to do is we got to interview each other. And I remember just being like, wait a sec, is that a Destiny Funko Pop sitting behind? Is that an Atheon? And so we started talking about Destiny, and it was like, for me, that was the moment I was like, we're going to be doing just great. Yeah. Because here's the thing, it goes both ways. You might not be a culture fit for your dream job. Like, that's kind of a scary thing to consider, right? And so if you're not feeling it, and maybe you disagree with the notes, goodness forbid that you feel that way, but culture fit goes both ways. Do you really want to work for a company that values the opposite of what you value? Having the humility to recognize that is also part of the process. And so we might be telling you this from the perspective of being part of the hiring process, but also as an interviewee, you definitely want to consider what are you learning about their culture when you go into the interview, right? So if you're sitting there with 3 amazing supervising senators, but they're all very calm and relaxed, and maybe you're not vibing with them, that's actually something to think about. Be like, oh wow, all the supervisors here are very calm and relaxed. They're probably dealing with a lot of stuff right now. And what does that tell you about the company? Every time I've gone into interviews as the interviewer, I know that in a way I'm representing like PlayStation's overall values. So I try to let myself dissipate a bit and not be so egoic. But that's something you have to consider as well.
As composers, we're often told not to work for free. What's your stance on this, especially when very new to the gaming scene?
All right, I think there is a certain... I think ultimately whatever you're putting your time and your energy to has to be in line with what you're trying to achieve, right? If you're being told not to work for free, fine. But if there's an opportunity to work with one of your heroes in which is going to open up more doors or is going to be like, great, it's a small contract, I'm just doing this little thing, and I'm going to learn so much. So I think it's not an easy answer within that, because to get other opportunities, you've got to be able to show something. You've got to have a portfolio. And you've got to also, there's something to be said as well for like, if you're creating content and you are prolific and you're just powering out all this stuff and it's fantastic, but you never actually work with another team or you never actually work with another person, you might still get pipped at the post, even if you are exactly musically the right person for the job, by someone that there is a track record to say, well, we can trust that we're going to be able to get this done in the time that we need. And that's a hard thing to be able to look at, right? So I think coming back to the whole question is that you're better to say no to avoid being exploited in a lot of ways, unless you are really specifically wanting to achieve something within this. And I think it's all about like what you're trying to achieve at each step of your career, at each opportunity that comes forward. Like, I don't think that I could say that of any of my freelancing opportunities, it ticked all of the triangle of needs, right? That I had plenty of time, gave me heaps of money, and the quality was good. At no point is that, no way. So I think it's going to be to do with what you're hoping to achieve at that each time.
And to put a sociology spin on it, I feel like if you look at Bourdieu's, I know I sound like such a wanker right now. If you look at Bourdieu's theory of capital, of there being like cultural capital and social capital, there's multiple things that can be gained. It's not always just economic capital.
Yeah.
And it is worthwhile looking at that and weighing it up. But then also realizing that when you do that, you're at some point going to need to have the personal strength to say, no, I actually do need the economic capital at this stage.
I think it's about what boundaries you're willing to put in place as a result of that. If you're happy to be okay with the idea of, right, this thing is really not paying me very well. The thing that made people actually stop, like, you'll see it maybe in the last couple of days and you'll see it this week, anybody at GCAP, there is a certain portion of like eyes glaze over whenever you mention you're in audio and people are like, oh no, they're going to just throw business cards, they're going to do the whole process, right? The thing that made the eyes pop back into attention for me was I did some stuff for Metal Gear Solid 5 years ago. Did some arrangement stuff. That's pretty cool. I got paid fucking peanuts for that thing. It was such an awful experience of a project. Whole other separate things. Whole things about this, it was not a good time. But that, in terms of the needs, did not tick the economical aspect. But suddenly people were like, oh, and the eyes are back in, and they actually want to listen to what you want to say. So that was the thing that opened the doors in the first place. Did not get me anything meaningful financially out of it, but it helped also then go, great, here's my boundary, not doing that again.
Yeah, I'm not a good example, I guess, because I did a lot of free work, but I think depends on if you are not exploited. I think that can be good. For example, in my career, I think almost all jobs that I did as doing free work results in something later. Like I talked yesterday that I did a fun game for Halo, and 3 years later, the same developers chat me like, oh, we are doing a Kickstarter for a horror game. Do you want to help us? And the Kickstarter was pretty awesome, and I get the gig, and was incredible to work in the project. And I did some other games, like a friend of mine work on Rivals of Ether, and he has asked me to work on Dungeons of Ether, and he was no money. I said, no, I can work. It's for a friend. It's like, I know that someone will get money from this, but I don't care. It's not a good example. But later on, now we are working on Rivals of Ether 2. We have we have a team work on the project. So I think it's maybe try to separate the good ones and the bad ones. I know that this is hard, I guess, but I think it depends on depends on how much opportunities we had as well, because sometimes we don't have opportunities, so it's a free job or none. And maybe it's good a free job because we can try to use that as a portfolio to get one that can pay us. So I think it depends on each person, I guess.
Yeah, and on that, it's tough because when you're young and just starting out, you really don't know what you're worth, right? And so you're hoping that you're worth something, and you know that this thing that you care about is worth something to you, right? And so something I've been very privileged to have is that, for years I was significantly underpaid as a Foley artist, but the benefits of working on certain projects, this is a terrible phrase, I wish there was something better for it, but we call them the golden handcuffs, right? Where it's like, it's just enough to compel you to stay, but you might be worth more than that, right? And so balancing that is really tough, and that's up to each individual. And I'm saying this as somebody who's earnestly gullible sometimes. So it's like, but the one thing I always knew was that I always loved what I did. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter if I'm making what I made when I was like 20 or even 19 compared to how much I'm making now at PlayStation. I've always loved Foley. And I'm sure for each and every one of you, you feel the same way about the things you're passionate about. But the moment when doing that thing that you love, you feel like you're being exploited and it's actually diminishing how much you care about what you're doing, I think that's a really important moment for you to step back and be like, I am being exploited. Right? And so it is really tough. And for the young people in the room, they're always going to hear like survivor biases from folks who have made it, where it's like, yes, you might want to take a few of those jobs because that's how you like get good. But the truth is, like, I took plenty of those jobs, and there were definitely like lines in the sand where I was like, oof, that did not feel good. So being able to feel that and trust that intuition and not tell the same lies to yourself, like, no, I have to do this really bad job because I need it. It's like, is it diminishing your ability to love what you're doing? And if the answer is yes, step away.
That's a really good point. And tiny little tip, even though I'm in a different industry, sometimes you do just need to ask, is this paid? Because sometimes places will just ask you to do work and not necessarily offer payment up front. And if you just say, oh, is this job paid, they can scrounge up some money for you. So don't be afraid to ask. Because people try to get away with what they can, quite frankly. Would you say a friendly applicant with less experience is more desirable than a highly experienced applicant that keeps to themselves? I think this is quite an interesting one. We've touched on this a little bit, and I think this is a slightly different angle of what we've talked about previously of red flags and being combative. How important, I suppose, is, friendliness, being friends with your coworkers?
I mean, being friends with your co-workers is, I can see a couple here. How you going? How's it going?
I thought you were going to say is optional.
No, you spend
Hello, colleague.
You spend too much time together for that to be a thing. That's the reality. It's like you do want to make sure that you're hanging out with people you get along with. In terms of, super experienced and perhaps is a bit more introverted or requires their own time and their own processes as well. Like they're both valuable aspects, right? You'd also consider what role is being offered. If it's somebody who's very green, but they are full of enthusiasm, they've been able to show, and they have demonstrable experience, right? They have demonstrated their capacity to at least, if not do everything to the highest possible standard, then they know what they need to do to get there, and they're showing they've got a growth mindset that they're able to demonstrate as well, is a really important part of that process. If it's a senior, you're definitely going to hope that they know what they're doing. And I guess the other side of that is if they're a senior, you'd hope that for them to get to that place in the first place, they'd have experience, and therefore you can also trust that track record that they are at least able to work with other people as well, by virtue of having that title previously.
I think in situations where I meet people who are a little bit less extroverted, always great to talk to their references, right? Because they might be very humble. They might not want to speak too much about their work. They might be just nervous during the job interview portion. But speaking to their references and really getting to know what they're like after they've let their guard down a little bit is a great way of truly understanding who that person is. We'd like to hope that all of our testing regimens when it comes to like interviewing folks can handle both personality types. I've definitely seen people who are almost like too friendly, like you're like a little worried. It's like this person's got nothing on their resume, but they've managed to like a finesse all the way up here. And I've also met people who are like, I had a friend who's so introverted that it has cost them jobs, which really sucks because she's so good at what she does. A really good team knows how to value both types of people, right? And so I like to think that when it comes to our responsibilities as people who are hiring you, that we'll have the right testing in place to figure that out. And so when it comes to that, if you can't get additional references from that person, not every person on your team needs to be an extroverted car salesman. I've definitely, Blake and I have a lot of clients who we work with who they prefer one approach or the other. If they want bubbly Joanna, let's go to izakaya afterwards, that's like one perspective, right? But they want brass tacks and they want to see numbers and stuff like that. We bounce off each other. Blake's sitting right here, by the way. So we bounce off each other and we're able to kind of like craft how we want to talk to the rest of the team and how we want to talk to our clients. So I think it's important to have a balanced team, and especially when it comes to that.
We have time for one last question. Do you prefer shaping roles to fit the strengths and interests of your people, or insisting on strictly predefined roles? Are there pros and cons to each approach?
That's a really good question. I think it comes back to wearing many hats. It's how many hats are required for the project is the other part of it. Does that project is there one person who their innate skill set when they walked in the door or what they've been able to develop, like so deeply perfect for this particular thing, you want to make sure that's an opportunity. But sometimes when you get to a point of wearing too many hats, that's when you'll go through and try and get a little bit more specific about it. So, I mentioned before, like we didn't have an audio engineer role, we didn't have an audio producer role. I was doing a lot of production stuff for a long time. That's a big hat to wear when you're trying to kind of keep things moving too. And so at a certain point, there is also the ability for different projects to just hit a critical mass and be like, this is a lot. Can we get someone else in to make sure that this is the exact niche that we need to fill? If not, is there anyone we've already got where we can reshuffle these things around? And coming back to what I was saying before about the JFM, I think that's a really nice aspect to it because the expectation is not that you will fit the criteria that is just like, you will have this level of experience and this boom, 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 all the way down. You're going to have zigzags where there's some things you're just going to be far and above fantastic at, and there'll be some things you're less good at. And I think that if you're trying to cookie cutter somebody, you're going to have a really hard time with it rather than leaning into your strengths and actually working out what you're going to do day to day to complement that.
Well, thank you for sharing all of your expertise with us.